Good afternoon and welcome to this month's Kelsey Museum Virtual Flash Talk. The topic today is the Flavian Monument Repatriation Project by our very own Kelsey Museum Director and Professor in the Department of Classical Studies here at the University of Michigan, Nicola Terrenato. Today's presentation will last about 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A with you, our audience. So if you want to save your questions till the end, and we will go ahead and address them then, but I just want to turn it over and welcome Nick.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you all for coming. Let me share my screen. I hope you guys can see the PowerPoint. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I will try to tell the story briefly. The story begins in 1901. Let's see, when our own eponymous hero, Francis Kelsey, was staying at the Grand Hotel near the Stazione Termini, which you can see in this postcard in the background. Back when, professors at the University of Michigan could stay at the Grand Hotel and Michigan would pick up the bill, which is not the case anymore. It is still a splendid hotel on the Quirinal. And reportedly, the concierge of the hotel put him in touch with, knowing that he was an archaeologist and that he was interested in buying antiquities. Francis Kelsey was buying antiquities in Italy from, entire collections to, one at a time. And so he was put in touch with somebody who was a foreman in some construction work that was happening nearby. We're not 100% sure where. And this construction worker had some marble pieces that were on sale that he was willing to sell. And so in this way, Francis Kelsey acquired pieces, quite spectacular pieces, such as this head of Vespasian that you know very well. And this is, these are the main pieces that were acquired in the process in our own catalog. And at the same time, the same foreman was probably also selling other pieces to other, certainly to a German professor, Professor Hartwig, who was also in Rome, and who ended up donating the pieces that he acquired to the National Museum in Rome, but also, as Elaine Gazda was telling me, potentially to other institutions, including the American Academy in Rome. So in other words, what is most likely that it was happening at this point, it was that there was construction work happening on the Quirinal itself, and that in the process of this construction work, these pieces were coming to light, and that the foreman was taking it upon himself to just selling them. We will come back to that, but the foreman was committing a crime by 1901 law. While this is before the 1939 Italian law that made it illegal to possess any kind of antiquity that was not already in a collection, an established collection. In any case, the foreman had no right to these pieces, which should have been reported, and in any case would have been the property of the owner of the land the construction was happening on, which was clearly not what was happening. So these pieces are stolen, and this is the long and the short of it. They came, of course, to the Kelsey, and they were, part of the exhibits and part of the collection. And there had been various hypotheses as to what they might be, and as many of you probably know, at some point, Professor Garrett Koppel of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, a person that I had the good fortune to meet personally and know quite well, primarily because I replaced him at the University of North Carolina when he retired in the late 90s. And he was still hanging around in Chapel Hill. And so, in fact, for a semester, I even lived in his house as I rented a room in his house. So Gerhard, who was this, whose incredible ability, philological ability when it came to Roman sculpture, I had the good fortune of appreciating personally, was made the connection that this piece of, part of the body of a soldier was matching, and in fact, a part of the same sculpture as this piece from the Hartwig pieces in the museum in Rome. And as Elaine was telling me, he came to Ann Arbor with a cast of the head, and in a quite magical moment, the two pieces just fitted together, as you see in the cover of this book. They were really just fragments of the same statue, or rather the same relief, I should say. And so this, kind of cemented further a hypothesis that had been circulating already for a few years, that these were all part of all the pieces, Hartwig pieces and the Kelsey pieces were all part of the same monument, and that this monument was this templum of the gens Flavia, the gens of the family of the Flavian emperors in that ruled Rome in the second half of the first century CE. And so this, of course, spurred a collaboration between the Museo Nazionale in Rome and the Kelsey that bore wonderful fruits in the form of, as you can see, exhibitions that showed the pieces reunited, the context reunited together, as well as the production of casts that the institutions very in the great, wonderful collaboration exchanged so that the pieces could be complete. I mean, that each institution could have as complete a set as possible. And so, and you see this catalog. So there was a show in Rome in the 90s and one in Ann Arbor. And then when the Upjohn wing was built in the 20-aughts, there was an opportunity for creating a reconstruction, much more detailed reconstruction and extensive reconstruction of the monument, which is the display that many of you will have seen in the Kelsey for over a decade, where of course the Kelsey pieces and the casts of the National Museum were reunited. You see in the top panel the two parts of the soldier that were the sort of the giveaway that made the join secure. And you see the various reconstructions, the hypothesis put together by Rita Pares and by Elaine Gazda as to how this would have worked. This was a wonderful display. You see here, pictures of it, and which, however, as you also probably know, in the context of a reorganization of the second floor, in preparation for the installation of a new Byzantine and Islamic gallery that the college has kindly decided to support, and that is going to be, one of our main priorities in the next few years, as well as other considerations having to do with ADA accessibility and other issues. Decision was made to take down this display and to record it three-dimensionally. Here is a little video of the and this is very provisional, but it's a three-dimensional model that we are putting together of this display, and that will be hosted on the, among the other various components of the Kelsey online presence, and will live forever in the and be usable interactively by online visitors as part of the Kelsey website. And so at the moment, the pieces, the two most important pieces, are in a case now on display in the second floor, as you can see. So this happened at our end, and what is happening meanwhile in Italy is that there has been really a and this has been going on for decades, but in the last few years, as part of a reorganization of the ministry, there has been really a major push for the retrieval of objects that are of Italian provenance and that are illegally in other countries. Initially there was a focus on recently stolen objects, objects that were stolen in the last few decades. But this consideration is extending to older objects that left Italy before that. And if you want, you can also place this in the context of the debate that, for instance, is happening around the Elgin marbles, where, of course, the Elgin marbles left Greece. It wasn't even the nation of Greece at the time, a long time ago, more than 200 years ago. And yet and so there can be no question about the legality of their presence in London, but there are indeed questions, and as you know, an enormous debate about the ethical implications of their presence in London. And in this context, I will say that remarkably, Italy has not only been the recipient of these repatriations, but also has been the active part, ranging from, the one piece of the Parthenon that was in Italy that was repatriated last year to, for instance, the Aksum obelisk that was repatriated to Ethiopia already more than 10 years ago. So really, there is a renewed push to look at these the ethical implications of these museum holdings. And here you see the ad for the Museo dell'Arte Salvata, which is a new space for temporary exhibits that is actually right next to that Grand Hotel that we were talking about in Rome, and were objects that have been retrieved in the way that I was describing, sometimes having to involve, a legal action and the police confiscating objects, like it happened at the Met quite last year, and in many cases instead, as part of a negotiation process that with the various institutions. So in the context of this really rapidly changing climate, the decision was made at the Kelsey to start a conversation about the possibility of repatriating our Flavian fragments with the Museo Nazionale in Rome. And this is especially in the context of this, I apologize, this is in Italian, but it's a news item that says that that 100 million euros have been used of European money for a complete revamp of all the four buildings of the National Museum. And in the context of that, there is also a renewed interest in this particular monument. So it seemed the prudent thing to do to enter into a conversation with the powers that be at the Museo Nazionale and with the Directorate General, so that we could start the conversation before they started it with us, which is always a good move. And in fact, this is an ongoing conversation. I have no big announcement to make today or even in the near future. What is the possibility that is being discussed is that the Kelsey would repatriate the fragments, who would then rejoin the context at the Museo Nazionale. And in return, the Director General would allow us to a long-term loan of other objects. And this, frankly, is an appealing possibility. As I said, nothing is decided. And, a number of, campus entities still need to weigh in on this. But essentially, this would have the advantage of, resolving the ethical implications of our ownership of these pieces, which I should point out, often they say, oh, well, if you start thinking along these lines, then you have to give back everything. For the Kelsey, that is absolutely not true. The vast majority of our objects come from either the partage system, which no one is questioning, or from acquisitions of entire collections that were historically established. Again, no one questions that. So in some ways, the Flavian pieces are a bit of an anomaly in our collections. And I think that there would be something to be said for bringing this ownership in line with the rest of our highly ethical ownership of most of our collection. It would recompose a archaeological context, which must be one of the things that we aspire to as archaeologists. And of course, the casts were a temporary solution, but just like at the Parthenon and of course Sipar Veliket, there is a great benefit to, of course, having all the originals in the same place, in terms of technical analysis, in terms of close detailed investigations, and so on and so forth. And finally, this would bring new objects that would potentially exhibition and scholarly value to the Kelsey on the long term. So they could be a new attraction that we have, and one where typically our contextual information is much better, because for this monument, while the hypotheses that have been put forward are quite convincing and interesting, it's still the case that we don't know where it came from, how the pieces were arranged, and pieces that we would be instead having on loan would come from scientific excavations, and they would have a much richer contextual information that would allow us to really do the most with them in terms of our ability to tell a story in the museum and to also do scholarly investigations and publications. So this is the project, and I was glad to take this opportunity to just illustrate it a little bit to our audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nick. I think now is a great time. We will open up the forum to questions from our audience. If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can put it in the meeting chat and I will read it out.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hi.
Yeah, this is Chris Wicki from Lake Forest, Illinois. I have a question for the professor. Did Francis Kelsey at the time realize that he was purchasing illegal art? And what was the attitude back then to that type of stuff?
Yeah, I think that, it's fair. I'm not a specialist in Kelsey biography, and we should really ask people like experts in the field. But I would say that this is a bit of an uncharacteristic move. What we can see of the modus operandi of Francis Kelsey was that first and foremost, he wanted to excavate the artifacts and, for Michigan to excavate its own artifacts. Then he was interested in acquiring, collections that were already well known and established. Occasionally he could buy individual pieces, but from antiquarians, from shops that would have, which at the time was legal. I can't think of many other instances where he would buy under the table. So I think that he might have thought that this was a great opportunity, and he might have, not been so clear about the ins and outs of the Italian law about this specific. He might have thought that just like you could buy from a store in Rome, you could buy from somebody from sort of the back of a truck. But really, the store would have to establish at least ownership, proper ownership, whereas these are really, he is essentially ended up receiving goods probably without realizing it.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Can I jump in here? This is
Yes,
Elaine.
Elaine.
Hi, I'll show my face, I think. I don't know what I'm doing with this program. Anyway, I can't see myself. Yeah, well, of course, I was very closely involved in the project from the time Gerhard Keppel found that the two sets of sculptures went together. There's a lot of uncertainty about things like individual heads that are floating around, as to where they would have been. But to address the question of Kelsey, when you go back into the record books, he was very careful about recording everything he purchased and was shipping to the States. These were just all of the pieces that came back to Michigan from Rome were just lumped in with stone samples. He had no clue what he was buying, in other words, in terms of a monument. I don't think he even cared. I think he wanted to have those samples. These are Pentelic marble and unusual for Rome. But yeah, so that's one thing I would like to say. He was building a big study collection for the university, and I think unaware and of any legal issues at the time. So that's in Kelsey's defense. One of the other things I wanted to bring up was that, in the course of doing 3D modeling of the installation of the casts, as we had them in the galleries for some 12 years, before anything goes back, if anything goes back to Rome, I would hope that we could do 3D modeling of each piece. For example, in the case of the head of Vespasian, on the back, where it's cracked, there are traces of pozzolana. If you turn that around, you would see adhering to the cracked pozzolana, which means that it was already a fragment when it was built into another structure in Rome, probably the Baths of Diocletian. Because that was the area in which it was ultimately found in Piazza Esedra. So anyway, I just think that, we want to respect the fact that we have invested a lot of research, time, effort in this monument, and that it's not as if we've been hiding it. We've been celebrating it, and we've been publishing it and doing marble testing and all the rest. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Nick, for your presentation.
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you for all the information you and photographs you very generously passed on to me for this.
You're welcome.
It looks like we have a few questions in the chat that I'll go ahead and read out for Nick. Lindley McAlpine says, this is an excellent initiative. Thanks for sharing. We're publishing some other fragments of marble, architectural, but not sculptural, presumably apparently from the same foreman in our Kelsey marble book. Is there any similar interest in them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that thank you, Lindley, and this is something that if negotiation progress, I should say, and I can say this with a smirk because I'm Italian by birth, that you never know with Italy with its government turmoils, and so this the whole climate could go away tomorrow for all we know. So. If the conversation continues, yes, then I think it would behove us to try to be as inclusive as possible in repatriating an entire archaeological context. I will also say, in response to Elaine, and also to what a question from Ellen Lynch in the chat, that of course we would never dream of repatriating anything before all the possible documentation is done. So of course 3D scanning, high definition 3D scanning of all the pieces, and of course we would keep the casts, and we would and we could potentially even take small samples of the marble from the back, if we decided that. So of course we would want to, in other words, squeeze every last ounce of information before we return. And with the knowledge, however, that I want to emphasize that when I broached the subject in Rome, this was saluted as a wonderful proactive initiative that really pins a medal on our chest. So we would be very well positioned even after these objects had gone back to Rome to have full access to them, because once again I think that the great value is in starting the conversation with them before they start it with you, because you should. And as Elaine says, it's not like anyone can doubt our good faith, because we've always, unlike some other museums in the United States, we haven't hidden these in a basement waiting for them to cool down. We have always announced their presence and participated very actively in reconstructing the circumstances of how they were found. So I think that this is the natural continuation of this great effort to stay ahead of the curve, which I think is really the duty of every museum, to always be aware of how the discourse is changing, how the ethos is changing, and be responsive, and if possible stay ahead of that and get out in front of that, rather than having to be dragged kicking and screaming into new ideas and new discourses.
It just occurred to me as we were talking that I'd like to call attention to the fact that one of our graduate students back in the 1970s, Anne Hackle, who is now retired as a professor at Kalamazoo College, she was the one who recognized or thought that the head of Vespasian belonged to the Templum Gentis Flavii. That was her idea. And even the Superintendente La Regina, when he came here for a conference in connection with our version of the show that had been in Rome, it congratulated her and said, it all started with you. So just a little shout out to graduate students.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I mean, I think that, as I said, we've been very good citizens when it comes to these pieces. And of course, I also want to say that nothing of what I said intended to be throw any shade on Francis Kelsey, who was a visionary and decades ahead of his time. At a time when other people putting together museums in this country and in many other countries were behaving like savages. Francis Kelsey had a much better understanding of the value of archaeological context, and of the importance of being ethical acquisitions, and that's why our collection has a much better bill of health than many other collections around the world. So I do think that this was a bit anomalous, and I, it's easy for me to say, but I have a suspicion that if he were here with us, he would probably agree that this was a purchase that was not exactly in line with those that he had made, the other ones that he had made, and that would make sense to take a special attention to it, like we're doing now. Oh, there was a question about the from Mireille Lee about the administration at Michigan. So I have broached the subject with the deans, and they are very responsive to that. After all, the university has a long history of repatriation under NAGPRA, but also to other. For instance, there has been recently a major repatriation of Native American artifacts to, I guess you would say, First Nation in Canada, to First Nation groups in Ontario that were at the University of Michigan. So conceptually, they see this as being part of the same sphere of repatriating objects that belong in parts of either different parts of the country or other countries altogether. In terms of the actual bureaucracy of Michigan, that's a bit more complicated in that, of course, these pieces would have to be deaccessioned. It's a more complicated process that has some multi-steps involved, and where at some point OGC would have to vet a memorandum of understanding that would have to be drawn between the University of Michigan and probably the Ministry of Culture in Italy. I think Anne has a question.
Yes, I just wanted to mention, with the new layout on the second floor and the addition of paint on the walls, and the addition of the two cases with the two heads from the Flavian monument, how much more of an impact sculpture in the museum has. And I just hope that we are making the most, in that we're in the midst of renovating and adding galleries, of really what a new sort of aesthetic perspective you have going up onto the second floor and seeing the displays of sculpture that have recently been added to being on display, and the ones that are currently there, how much more of an impact they seem to be making.
Yes, well, yeah, absolutely, and that is absolutely the case. And in fact, I would also say that one exciting possibility, potential here, is that in terms of it's not unthinkable that in terms of the return loan that we would get in return for the repatriation, we could express some preferences. So we could say what kinds of pieces, because there are as a large amounts of pieces that Italy could loan to us, not necessarily from Rome. They could be from anywhere. And so we could be in a position where we could try to finesse a loan that, for instance, further enhances our holdings in sculpture or in wall painting. We're also, of course, it's another element where we have a great emphasis thanks to the Villa of the Mysteries room, but at the same time, our holdings of actual painted plaster are limited, and there could be something to be said for a for the ability to have more extensive portions of wall painting.
I also wanted to mention with the move of the case with the Roman urns and monuments, how much more of an impact it has in its current location. I think it looks wonderful, and it's so much easier to concentrate on it and get the most out of it.
Well, I'm very glad you liked it. I will, this is primarily the ideas of Nicola Barham, who's here in the audience, our curator for Roman art. And so she deserves the credit for the new arrangement, which I'm glad you liked. And I don't know if Nicola has anything to add here. She may be busy.
I'm just really pleased you like it. Thanks so much. I do appreciate feedback. So if others have any comments and would like to email me, do feel free. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Nicola. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay.
Excellent. Other questions? Okay.
Thank you all. If there are no other questions, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. I just want to say thank you so much, Nick, for being our speaker today. That was incredibly interesting. Thank you for joining us today. And I want to thank everyone in our audience. Thank you for your participation and your support here of the Kelsey Museum. And keep an eye out for future Flash Talks on our website.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me and for your attention. You
Thank
guys
you.
take care. Bye-bye.